It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Renée González Montagut to Tufts. Renée did her undergraduate degree in biology at Occidental College. And then you're originally from Mexico, and you were noticing there was just lots of deforestation going on in Mexico. And so areas that were being converted to pasture is like, well, when a rainforest is cut, can it come back? And is always a question that biologists have been wondering is how permanent is deforestation? So Renée decided she wanted to pursue a PhD at Harvard and sort of explored issues of regeneration of forests in degraded lands. And so she worked in Mexico and completed her PhD at Harvard in 1996. What I have noticed in people's careers is that it's not unusual to see a pivot. And Renée did a pivot. She same topic, like really concerned about loss of natural habitat, but she thought, I really want to be more on the protection side. I want to make sure that wild places in Mexico are preserved. And so she joined the Mexican Fund for the Conservation of Nature shortly after finishing her PhD, has been there ever since. And she's now the deputy director, or the general director is the official title, of that organization. And what was a small organization at the time, they managed to protect like 10 forest patches. Now they are actively protecting over 95. She works a lot with finance institutions globally. She's working with other people throughout Latin America to try to sort of network and create opportunities for conservation. So it's really cool to sort of see someone take their science and find new and creative ways to apply it to some of our pressing challenges facing our forests. And so I do have one more thing. She has taken all sorts of really cool leadership positions, which you can read about online, but I just want to highlight she's founding member of the Mexico chapter of the Ecological Society of America and the Women in Nature Network. She is part of the Assembly of the Mexican Center for Philanthropy, an advisor to the Committee of the Mexican Climate Initiative, and a distinguished advisory group for the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. So you can see her interests are broad, related to forests, related to carbon. I can't be more excited to have you here. Thank you, Renée, for coming to Tufts.
Yeah? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Colin. It's my pleasure to be here. Tufts is such an amazing community, and everybody's like so welcome and so warm. So thank you, everybody, neighbors from Tufts, faculty members, students. Thank you for joining what is the quest of humanity at this point, which is the environmental issues. It's really an honor to be here. So what I want to talk to you about today is transforming financial into natural resources. We live in a world where money has been invented as a resource, but the pressing challenge right now is natural resources. How do we transform one thing into the other? You know, that paper that you hold and call money cannot really, how can it just be, what do you do with it so that at the time and scale that we need gets transformed into solutions? So as you all know, we are facing a challenge that we've never seen before. And humans as a species have never seen before, because warming is unprecedented. In the last 2,000 years, all of science shows us that. And so, we have now a lot of effects of this changing climate. And this changing climate, together with our spread as a species, and remember, biologists, we always think about, individuals within a population, is showing effects. So on the left, you can see the ecosystem conditions at the top, they're going down. Areas with less water, just the ecosystem is not providing the services that it used to provide when nature, after many millions of years of evolution, had come up with these services, where we are completely co-evolving with this. The species is really like right on the left side. You guys will read all the time that in the last 2 years, because of the high temperatures, 1/3 of coral reefs in the Caribbean have been lost. 1/3 also in the Australian reef are lost. So we're seeing a loss that we've never seen before. Same with birds, and insects are also showing a downfall. So freshwater availability is also going down. Our life expectancy, except for COVID, is going up. So we're more humans. We have less, children than before, but at the same time, our life expectancy is longer. So food supply is going up. That's part of the extraction that we're doing from nature. And the climate-related disasters, as you read every day, they're going up. So this is the state of the world. This is the world we're living in. And all of us that are here, we have to do our best to actually change these trends. So lots of things are going on. So not everything is like a really terrible future. We have a lot of people working to make this a better world. Just a week and a half ago, we had 22 ministers of environment joining in Mexico City. They were called and invited by the Brazilian and the Mexican government to discuss these very same issues that we're talking about today. And they came up with a declaration that will be presented at the Conference of the Parts. Every 2 years, people, or every year, they join to discuss either biodiversity or climate change. There's conventions on both topics at the United Nations. And that's where leaders get together and try to make a change. This year, it will be in November in Belém, in Brazil. And so, we have this continent just getting together to see what can happen. But, in terms of finances, we are at a point where we're seeing changes. Right now, as you know, the Green Climate Fund is the largest fund that the countries have put together, 196 countries, to actually address the issue of climate change. And, unfortunately, $4 billion that were planned to be, brought by the United States have actually been canceled. In Europe, we're seeing trends that are very similar. Europe now trying to defend itself, and as one public official told me from the International Cooperation Agency, instead of investing in trees, we're going to invest in tanks, unfortunately. So the priorities in finances are shifting, and the world is spending now, what seems to be less money, at least in the multilateral front, for climate change and environmental issues. So this actually is a screenshot if you go into the webpage of the COP30, this Conference of the Parts that will take place in Brazil. This is what is telling us what will happen, is how can you transform money, those little coins, into nature? And we have to be very creative about this, because it's not an instant solution. It's not like you put the money and then you have the answer right there. It's the Midas effect. You actually have to think, what do you do to actually propel this? And if you have less money, because you will hear over and over, it's not enough. Well, we have to look at the other side. How much is enough? It's really how we are going to spend this money. Where are we going to actually put those funds so that we get a transformation in the response? So I want to talk to you about networks. And, as an ecologist, I always think of the world as an ecosystem. And we in Mexico, the Mexican Fund for the Conservation of Nature, we're part of an ecosystem. There's 110 environmental funds all over the world. For some strange reasons, the Latin Americans are the most organized. Don't ask me why. This is not usual. And so we are part of this network of environmental funds of Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's 31 environmental funds in 20 countries. And the Mexican Fund, we are the one in Mexico. We are the direct access entity for the Green Climate Fund. This is a new modality with the multilaterals that was really requested by the Global South, of just having direct access. It's been 30 years that all these environmental funds have been being created, so it's really good that we can actually, through a lot of exams and papers and due diligence, we actually get direct access to the Green Climate Fund. And also, the Green Climate is focused, the largest fund for climate change, and the largest fund globally for biodiversity is the Global Environment Facility. And the GEF, we have actually, 28 years that we've been working with the GEF. So we've seen how it grows and hopefully is bringing a lot of solutions to the table. Mexico is a mega diverse country. If you look at Mexico, is that country that was really close when 3 million years ago, it connected, the country with North America and South America. So that was like a big party, a big botanical and animal party where, species started migrating. And because it has a lot of mountains, it actually can host a lot of the different species. So it's one of the 5 richest countries in the world, what we call mega diverse countries in terms of fauna and flora. So it's a big responsibility. What we actually in the Mexican Fund, we give grants out. We strongly believe that, the demand has to come from the field. People have to tell us what they can do. And then we look at those proposals. We have independent evaluators. If you ever want to be part of it, just, make sure that you contact us. And we have given over the years more than 3,000 grants all over the country. The areas where we focus are conservation, sustainable management, and capacity development. So these are the numbers, and I want to focus after 3,000 grants, especially on the last 2 figures. How many people get involved, participate, and start changing their behavior because of a few funds can actually make that difference and can start changing practices? And how many hectares are we actually, providing some funds? And I really use the royal we here because it's a lot of people that are involved in this. We are just, providing a little bit of funds, but that attracts other funds and that attracts other people and lots of organizations. So we are aligned with 3 United Nations conventions, the one on biological diversity. Last year in Cali, that was the Conference of the Parts for Biological Diversity. The other one is the one on climate change, and the other one is to combat desertification. So all those 3 international conventions signed by many countries actually have their expressions in every country as national strategies. So Mexico has a national biodiversity strategy. In November, the new goals for the nationally determined contributions will be presented for climate change. That is where the countries say, when are we going to reach net zero in terms of emission? And also the soil strategy for sustainable agriculture. And our organization is really geared towards that. Conservation, it's really helping to protect what's still left and, those protected areas and endangered species that are out there. Sustainable management, we're going to look into it. It's like how, when you go beyond the protected areas, where do you go and work with fishermen, with, people in forests, with farmers to actually help them sustain the resources in the long term. And since we just provide funds, we don't implement projects, then capacity building is key because we need strong partners in the field telling us what is really urgent to do and how we can build partnerships. So I'm just going to go into conservation, the first one of those 3, and just tell you what has happened over the last 28 years. We partner with the National Commission for Protected Areas called CONAM. And what we do is we actually make sure that the funds come. We have 25 different donors that have given us endowment funds. And we also have funds that are not endowment, where we actually apply directly the funds in the field. And we provide technical and administrative support, a lot of planning. People sometimes don't have time to plan. So we provide them with tools to do that. But CONAM has the tough job, which is, being in the field, monitoring how things are going on, surveillance, sustainable management, restoration. And Mexico is very different from other countries. There's people living in these protected areas. It's not federal land. It's actually communities that own this land. So it's really working with them to actually make sure that their natural resources can actually stand the proof of time. And then we cannot give the money directly to government. So we resort to the daily administration by NGOs and all these projects, all these programs that are, the working plans in the field have to be built in consensus with local communities because they're the owners of the land. So just to give you an idea of how this works, this is, the Global Forest Watch, and here in this area is where you have the protected areas of, you probably have heard about Calakmul. So you can see all around is completely deforested, and where we have protected areas, the forest stands. That shows us that protected areas are efficient. They actually protect the natural habitat. And there's numerous studies that have shown that if you put some funding into it, then they actually lower deforestation rates and illegal activities. Let me see if I can. Yeah, you can see here how over time, kind of cool what Global Forest Watch does. Everything else disappearing. And I mean, it's just in our lifetime. And I mean, this is like, 2001 to 2023 that all of this is disappearing. So really the protected areas are Noah's Ark. We just have to have that particular spot in the Yucatan Peninsula is where we have the highest density of jaguars. And jaguars, as you know, need 4,000 hectares, just the male, to move around. So we really need to protect large patches of forest with the communities. This is Mexico in terms of its protected areas. So it has 232 federal protected areas. They're all over the country. Those that are in dark green are the ones that still need to be funded. So that's our goal, to actually make sure that funds reach those places all over Mexico. And those with light green, lime green, those are the ones that already have some funding assigned to them. On the right-hand side, you can see this is what 196 countries signed, is that out of the terrestrial area, we are committed to the 30 by 30 goal. That is, by 2030, 30% of the country needs to be effectively managed. Where are we right now? Well, we have decreased for 12% of the country in terms of terrestrial surface, but only 8% has resources, sufficient resources to ensure minimal support. So our idea and our goal is to go from the 8 to the 12, and then using other means to conserve that are not just federal protected areas, but state protected areas, private land, community land, all sorts of different ways to do this. And the marine area looks a little bit better because we have 10% that has been decreed, large patches. Of course, you will see a lot of countries decreeing a lot of marine area that's kind of far away, right? So yeah, that's easy, right? But, we have to still go from the decree of 24%, only 10% has funding. And marine protected areas are more expensive than land protected areas. You need boats and you need to go out there. You need, gasoline to power these boats. So that is quite a challenge. This is what we've been working with CONAMP, is like, how much do you have? Right now, the annual budget of the federal protected areas in Mexico is $100 million. It has been sustained. It actually had an increase, but this is expressed in dollars. And so we had a little bit of a hit by the exchange rates. And what you see in purple is the funds that the Mexican fund channels. It's small amount of money, but it's always there. So if there is a fire within 24 hours, people are going to have funds to actually move to the site. These funds are also available the 1st of January. Federal funds usually come in until March, April. So it's really filling in a gap that's very necessary. And what we've done through a lot of studies, especially CONAMP, is calculate to cover the 232 protected areas, how much do you need to grow? And it turns out that they need to double their budget. So while they double the budget, this is what's called a transition fund. And we are going to raise funds to actually make sure that those protected areas have the funding that's required while the government increases its budget. Right now we are kind of like discussing back and forth, like 2026, you need to increase it 20% because Mexico signed an international agreement that it will do so. So, and we can help raising the rest of the funds. But this is an ecosystem. They need to start, then we can raise funds. And the funding sources that we've looked at are, international sources, especially bilateral and multilateral, Green Climate Fund, GEF, the Adaptation Fund, the German government, and then also private sources, both international and the Mexican private sources. So that's one way to deal with, transforming financial resources, just having presence in the field. Another one is giving the money directly to communities. Let me tell you this, the 28-year story of the monarch butterfly reserve, which in Mexico, as you know, has all the wintering sites for this absolutely amazing phenomenon of monarch butterflies going all the way to Canada and then coming always to the same places in Mexico. So we had very high deforestation in 2001. You can see there was a decree, and actually the people, the community members, deforested even more, thinking they're taking away with the decree this protected area. And we started with payments for ecosystem services. This area is very important for water, for Mexico City. That little town with 20 million people, it needs a lot of water from the monarch butterfly reserve. So we started, and when they saw that it was indeed that those communities that conserve their forests were getting funds, they started responding. And it's not a lot of money, but it sort of showed their pride, and they started working on that. So by 2009, we actually saw the first time that there was no illegal logging. And then from there on, it has been almost none. Actually, World Wildlife Fund is going to get the data now, because they also started reforesting. So right now we actually have more forest than we did back in 28 years ago, so 25 years ago. So it's really interesting how it works and how the community actually is doing all the heavy lifting here of protecting their land. And they actually there's 34 organizations working on this. So that's, when I say we, it's really an ecosystem. So talking about ecosystem, in terms of protected areas, what I was telling you is that we are going to focus on the existing protected areas with CONAMP and with all the communities in those 232 protected areas. But we need donors and organizations working on new federal protected areas, private ones, state ones, where Wildlife Fund is taking on this task, municipal protected areas, and then this other means of effective conservation. This is something that came up in the different COP meetings, and it's no-take zones for fisheries. And the fishermen decide where that no-take zone is going to take place, and it has a spillover effect. You protect where recruitment takes place, and you have more to fish. There's also areas where you can do wildlife management. There's biological corridors that are also culturally important. All these means are being right now studied and hopefully pushed forth in the next coming years. Sustainable management. So let's go beyond just protection. In Mexico, we talk about watersheds because rivers really define our territory, except for the Yucatan Peninsula, where everything is flat. The rest of the country has two huge mountain ranges that meet here in sort of the waist of Mexico, and like the narrowest part. And we are between two oceans, the Pacific, the Atlantic. We receive a lot of hurricanes. So we're very vulnerable to climate change. So what we do is we go beyond protected areas. We define the territory that's marked by the rivers. And we've been working with the communities and the organizations and state governments of all these watersheds, the ones that are like marked in yellow. And over the years, we have actually established partnerships, and partnerships take time. So now the idea is to go beyond this. We were just talking with the Mexican government last week and bringing in a global Green Climate Fund grant that will actually help us cover this. And the government is going to actually work a lot on the rivers. This part here is where most of the population in Mexico is found. So it's very important that from coast to coast, we cover this and we actually restore a lot of it. What we do here is actually what we call integrated watershed management plans. So we use INVEST models. This is actually a creation of Stanford. And we do models where, and when I say we, I have not done anything, and this is someone that really knows what they're doing. And so what they actually map all the watersheds, and they start the mapping also the offer of ecosystem services. For us, the most important one is water quantity, but also soil retention and nutrients. So that's mapped out. And then how is the demand of all those ecosystems? Where are the towns and the cities that are using most of that water? And then once that's mapped, then they actually put some movement into it. How is the landscape changing? How is it going into agriculture, into urban areas, into forests? What is remaining as a forest? Where is cattle ranching expanding? And then the scenarios of climate change. All this is brought to the field with the communities. And there's tons of workshops that take place, and people love maps. They want to see where their house is, how the neighbor is affecting their plot of land, and they start talking and they start saying, no, you scientists, you're wrong. Really what we need to protect is here because you don't have it there, but there's actually there a well or something that needs to be protected. And then there's this is the result of all of this work. Where do you need to conserve? Where do you need to restore? And where do you need to change what you're doing so that you can adapt to the changes that are coming up? And that plan will change in the future because climate is changing and people are changing, right? What we do know right now is that the upper watershed, if we have areas that are deforested, you can see here, this is the Jamapa watershed where that actually feeds with water the port of Veracruz. Veracruz is the largest port in Mexico. Look at the data. When we started seeing this, we were just amazed. If you look at the last, century, you will see that hurricanes, cyclones, and all sorts of these meteorological aspects are going up. I mean, there's clearly a trend going upward. So in the upper watershed, if you don't have forest cover, what happens is there's no soil retention. So all that soil starts going down the river, clogging the rivers, and look how it looks down by the ocean. It's completely flooded. So what we need to do, and we've done studies to actually support this, trees are just amazing. They retain soil, they filter water, and they are very cheap to put in, So that's a very good solution to do that. So in the upper parts, there's restoration going on. Here, this is for Colin, the coffee going on there, and also areas that are higher up in the mountain. And then by the ocean, mangroves are amazing. These are the nurseries. If you actually keep those mangroves, you're going to have more fisheries and you're going to have more, sustainable livelihoods. So it's again an ecosystem. We need to work with protected areas at the top, for example, the Pico de Orizaba, which is the highest mountain in Mexico, or the marine protected areas by the ocean. But in between, we have a landscape where we have to work with the ranchers to do regenerative ranching. I'm proud to say that there's already a group of more than 2,000 ranchers that are actually practicing regenerative ranching, biological corridors, sustainable agriculture, and what we don't do, but we have partners that do this, sustainable cities. And so development of capacities. We have seen through time that we may channel more funds to the field, but we need people that receive those funds to actually transform them. And that's only when people actually can join in and actually receive the funds and then use them in the best way. So through 26 years, we've been working with this network of environmental funds, and different donors have joined in, and there's standards, practice standards for those environmental funds. So you can actually do your self-assessment and know how your governance is and how your different aspects of your organization are doing. What we want to do now is bring this to the field and actually say, okay, we need to increase the governance of communities, because when you provide them with funds, you want to make sure that they make good use and they are transparent and they're really accountable for how they're using, not to us, but to their peers in the field. Social aspects, very important. Gender issues. We've learned through the years, more that you involve women and children, the long-term goals are better achieved, And then the environmental practices. Those are a little bit easier because there's still a connection in the field of how nature works. So we come to the conclusion that this is like an ecosystem, right? Everybody needs to do different things. We can bring in the funds, but we need, we may be those mycorrhizae. I don't know if you guys are following up the revolution that's taking place in botany If not, just I urge you to, read The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger, or to read Susan Zimmer. What now we're discovering is that cooperation is more important than competition. And so what's going on here? Trees are actually connected, and they are actually, just exchanging nutrients and water and God knows what, And so fungi are doing these links. And so we see ourselves as fungi connecting the different actors, and maybe the nutrients is the financial resources, but we need those trees to actually turn that into leaves and use different means to actually come up with solutions. So what we've learned in 30 years is actually to best transform financial into natural resources, a human ecosystem is necessary, where you need to define a common goal, and that's usually a territory. If you have people that are staying in a place for a long time, they're going to be concerned about their natural resources. They're going to be looking around and saying, I will need water to survive in the future. I will need fertile soils. I will need clean air. So it's important to actually start making that social fabric. Then you need to involve the key actors, talk to them, and also build trust. Humans work in groups if they are trusting their partners, the friends, so you have to build that. And consensus is a very good way to do it. And to build consensus, you need to know the differences. And we like differences because everybody brings different capacities to the table. So you need to identify those niches, and then you need to strengthen those capacities. You're very good at bringing money in. Great, Renee, come here. But I don't know how to restore a forest. So somebody else will do that, And then we need to always link those niches. And that we've learned that institutional arrangements are very important. It's like these pacts, these agreements of where, you are responsible for this, I'm responsible for this other part. It needs time. And only when you have that is when funds can be actually used for implementation of projects. So what we are pushing right now in all the REDLAC funds is we need to actually have like some funds to establish this first. A little bit more flexibility there than what the multilateral funds give us. What we've learned, there's like some no regret investments. So I'll give you a few and see how you, park rangers, there's tons of studies that show that there's a study actually published in Science in 93 countries. If you have presence in the field, you lower illegal activities. Governance, very important. When you saw in the monarch butterfly, the peak of deforestation, we actually looked into 34 indicators. One community was responsible for 95% of the deforestation. And that community had no social fabric. Everybody was fighting each other. So governance is very important. And then women-led initiatives, there's, Intertwined, a book that came out last year, has all the data showing that this actually is very well supported. And children are like a very good way to actually make parents listen to children that are learning the basics of nature. And organizations linking different groups. And that's where I think a lot of you are going to find this bridging. Right now, you guys are very important because you can be bridges between countries, bridges between sciences and other disciplines. Just linking that is very important. What has happened in very short amount of time is we've moved into cities and we've left the countryside, so we are focusing on screens, science, on financial systems, but in the countryside, that's where the ecosystems are. That's where still some ancestral knowledge is found, every day, even less. And the systems are based on family. There's nothing wrong with either side, but we need to be linking this. And we need to make sure that those people in the field know enough of financial systems to actually have a bank account and be using the money. Ancestral knowledge, it can be good, but also there's some traditions that are like very sexist in Mexico, So what do you bring in that pendulum will bring these worlds together? And so where we still need a lot of the help, and I'm really eager to hear you, is because the future is in your hands, is how do we build trust in human assemblages at a scale in time and space, you know? So how do we speed these things up when building trust takes time? So is there something like Tinder that can bring ecosystems of people together, you know, and actually have in this quest of improving this, can the technology help us map actors and niches and linking them? And then what we've learned also is that scaling up is much better when it's done among peers. So if we bring, you know, fishers from one area of Mexico with some of another area, or ranchers or farmers, they talk to each other. It's the same language. It goes faster. But so I'm really eager to hear what the future will bring in your hands. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that presentation. We do have time for questions and happy to bring the mic. Please speak into the mic because we have people online and they want to hear your questions. So
Thank you so much, Renee. It was such a inspiring, uplifting talk in a time where we really need it. I had lots of questions, but I'm just going to start with one and to give others a chance. Which one to pick? So I think you did a great job presenting all the promises of this work and this is the importance of it. So I was wondering, what is the biggest challenge in getting this accomplished beyond obviously getting money to do it? What is the biggest challenge that you are facing to get it done?
Where we're really breaking our heads and we have no answer is that we actually finance the green. We don't green the finances, you know, so we're not in greening finances, but in actually financing the green. And we have a lot of very good examples of community enterprises that are doing great things, but we cannot scale them up. It's like, I don't know, like that's the biggest challenge. And bringing the money in is not a problem. There's a lot of people that say, we can bring, you know, we get calls and say, we can put $20 million at a 3% interest rate per year. Where can we put that investment? I have no idea. I mean, because the community enterprises that we have, you know, kind of identified through time, we can probably put $50,000 and hope that, you know, that but if they don't scale up. So that's like a real big challenge right now.
I guess, can I ask a segue question? So that was another one of my questions. How do you decide who you're giving the money to, how the money is going to be allocated, who makes the decision within the community? Is this this privilege given to NGOs working in the community? If so, how do you choose what NGOs, what projects get selected? If you could tell us a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of the process of giving the money and maybe even mentioning a particular project or projects?
Sure. We do calls for proposals, and that's how you actually, and they are like geared towards legally constituted organizations. So they don't have to, they can be, you know, cooperatives, farmers, groups, as long as they have the legal papers that they can, you know, receive funds and they can give us an invoice when they receive those funds. They have to have a bank account. And when we receive the proposals, we actually have independent evaluators. Over time, first it was just biologists. Over time, we've known that we have to actually interact with all the other disciplines. And right now it's very multidisciplinary. So that's when they get selected. And we have had some successes, for example, especially with forest management. The forestry sector in Mexico has more than 30 years of actually like working with universities, with the government, with just the private sector in general. And there we had money from the Inter-American Development Bank. They provided loans. We actually partnered with a microfinancing organization called Findeca. So Findeca worked like all the loan parts, and we did all the technical, you know, support through the years, and the loans were actually repaid. So it was very, very good. I mean, just very good experience. When we try to do that with the cattle ranchers, we are coughing. And I think maybe it's because for them to actually organize them, they're kind of like the Lone Rangers, just getting together, it's harder for them. And farmers is also a little bit of a challenge. And now I say fishermen and fisherwomen, because now fortunately we have both. In the past, it was only fishermen. Actually, we're going into that realm now. But it was easier with forestry. And now we have a project, it's called Conecta. It's money that the World Bank provides, and it's originally GF money. And that one is being a challenge with the cattle ranchers.
One of the things that really strikes me about your work, and it's something that I've always been conscious of in my work in Costa Rica, is that I'm not Costa Rican. You are Mexican, so you automatically have status. But I'm wondering if you could, since the audience here, many of them are from Massachusetts, and if they're thinking internationally, and if they're thinking about ways in which they might engage with organizations like yours, what are some kind of really cool stories in which you have collaborated with people outside of Mexico to make the Mexico story more successful?
Yeah, definitely the links with other cultures are very important. And I think people with, globalization and with all the social networks, we come to realize that right now, for example, in Mexico, Korean soap operas are very famous. When would you have thought about that, right? And so people start seeing that there's different skills in different cultures, and that people that are, from developed countries will have the ability to, for example, write proposals for this very sophisticated areas or funding sources. And it helps a lot when people travel back and forth, just seeing and spending time with communities. That's really something that I strongly advise you to do. Just get your hands dirty, listen to them, and then you become an ambassador. It doesn't matter where in the world you come from. Humans are humans everywhere. And so you can relate to them easily, and then you can build from there. And then find your skills. What's your skill set? Are you a good writer? That's something that's very important. Are you good at communicating? We, in environmental issues, really need good communicators. I was talking, I don't know if any of you know Aristegui Noticias, the son of Carmen Aristegui is really into nature and is really saying, you guys have to communicate better. Teach us, And so we need all these links. And the good thing about environment is that it links all the different fields. Human rights, law, business. We need people to think about this business. Yeah, all this idea of startups are great. But what about the startup in the middle of, I don't know, the Tarahumara Sierra, where you have certain skill sets? So, you have to start linking all those worlds to make this a better planet.
Yeah. Hi. Okay, so we have a question from the Zoom. It's sort of a three-part question, so let me know if you want me to repeat myself. But this person says, to what extent do you find partnerships through private sector actors beneficial? Are corporations as effective as smaller scale enterprises? Additionally, I would love to hear if certifications programs have been supportive in funneling finance and building capacity at a local level in Mexico.
Yeah, very good question. For us, we're learning with the corporate sector and with the private sector. We speak different languages, NGOs, government, private sector. So we need translators all the time. The private sector, we started working and it's at a different pace. They really go fast. We have Zoom calls that are like half an hour and you're like, did I say what I should have said, And they think about risk. For us, you conserve a forest because that's what we do, right? Conserve a forest. No, they conserve ecosystems because that lowers the risk to their business model. So it's really interesting, like the comparison of language that you have there. And the private sector is moving towards that. What is really interesting about the private sector is that they're very open about saying, I don't really understand what a watershed is. So explain that to me, and we could sit down and then of course, I don't know what the, a financial statement looks like, but, so we can start exchanging that. And there is different platforms where the private sector is bringing funds. What also needs to be understood is that it's two different worlds. Maybe many corporations have a lot of funding and that the absorptive capacity in the field is not there yet. So for example, with the network of environmental funds, we just created a 501c3, and that's where, money can be channeled and distributed to all the different funds. And that's starting to happen. So that's good. But you need to kind of divide and divide even further, because it goes to for example, to Bolivia, but there's two environmental funds there, and then it goes to the NGOs. So it's a lot of layers to actually get to where you want. We want to make them as efficient as possible. So that's good for the corporate sector. Then there's all these things about carbon credits and nature positive credits and all that. We're seeing it's still not where we want it to be, but it'll be like a very good way for bringing funds. And also just, we need all sectors, and the private sector is a very important one. So partnering with NGOs, with networks of NGOs is very important, because they're the link with the field.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
Hello, thank you very much for the talk. I was wondering more about the monarch butterfly example and how the funds were used to stop illegal logging. And also, I'm not really sure how to tie this part in, but I think an issue oftentimes with sustainable changes is people's habits. So I was wondering if there were more changes. Do you have more problems with giving out funds, or more problems with trying to use those funds to help change people's habits, or how that works?
The second one for sure. And that's where we need all of you. I think getting the funds is not a problem if you have a good project. But the problem is, how do you make sure that the capacities and the, the adaptation in the field to use those funds in the best way happens? And that's extremely important. So one example, after 25 years of working in the Monarch Butterfly Reserve, used to be meetings that lasted days, it was really days, talking to all the community members. And it was payment for ecosystem services. So basically they had to give up their logging rights and actually receive funds. And the idea was, we're going to be flying over the forest. Back then we didn't use satellite imagery. And then, where there's forest, you will receive the funds. Of course, they didn't believe us. But once it started, it worked. And we had an endowment fund, that from many different donors came, including the government and the state governments. So we provided financial management. And then the scientists told us, lot by lot, plot by plot, this community has forests, this one doesn't, this one. And then, people went to the field with the communities and said, look, it's deforested here. And they're like, yeah, you're right, And then you start bringing in enforcement, because you know where that's happening. Now with satellite imagery is faster, and it's easier to saying, okay, this just happened here, And the money was provided in assembly meetings, so that people would know that the leader of the community is receiving these funds, and the community has to decide how to use them. And it's very interesting, because most of them use them for surveillance, for just walking their own forest. And even though it's a small amount of money, the communities put in a lot, because it's their legacy, right? And kids that were actually at those assemblies 25 years ago, now they're working as eco-tourist guides. So it's really interesting how, if you stay there for a long time and you just make this long-term partnerships, things can change. But behavior takes a while for trust to be built, and for, knowing who is responsible for what,
I'm fascinated by your use of satellite images, or even flyover images, some sort of remote sensing of forest cover, because that's a technology that didn't exist a lot before. And now you can incorporate it into sort of enforcement. And I think, so that's happening throughout the world. And Europe was going to put in a policy where they would give credits when coffee farmers didn't actually do deforestation. It's put on hold. Have you found the use of satellites to be overall something that is spreading beyond the monarch area, but all throughout Mexico? And is it making your life better and easier to sort of do your work?
Yes, definitely. I mean, technology has some challenges, but it definitely has a lot of advantages. So right now we're working with the European Space Agency, and they're going to hopefully be comparing, I hope that, through this talk, I don't put them on the spot, but do pairwise comparisons, protected areas with funding and protected areas without funding. And I sure hope that the result is what came out 10 years ago, which is those that have funding, deforestation rates are lower, because that is really the test. Are we making a difference or not? With the oceans, it's more difficult. And so we're getting different biologists to tell us what we can do with, chlorophyll types and all that sort of thing. But it's very interesting how technology, there's one guy that was telling me a week and a half ago, he actually has an NGO in Michoacan. He doesn't work with government. He just works with the private sector. And it's the people that package the avocados. And so for every single crate of avocados that actually is deforestation free, they are putting $1 extra. And that extra $1 is for surveillance. So they have this network of communities, and they have satellite imagery of every day. And when they detect some deforestation, they tell the community, is this? And then the community moves fast, because sometimes the plots of land are so large that you don't know that they're deforesting your own community. So that's working very well. And what they told me, and I really need to research this, and this is young people doing just innovation, just wonderful, is that now they can actually file the lawsuit against the illegal logger in real time through artificial intelligence. So I want to see that. I mean, this is really cool. So.
Okay, last question.
Yes. Okay. So throughout your presentation and question and answer, you have, I think, alluded to the importance of representation of women in conservation work and increasing representation and the importance. So I was wondering if you could reflect a little bit about, through your career, what changes have you seen, and also maybe as being a woman yourself, reflect about your journey in the conservation world.
Yeah, well, the different groups that need to be represented, it's a very difficult task, so we've learned through time, and this is, not because I'm a woman, but I have seen what happens in the field is that you have 30 projects and 10 of them are women-led. In some way, we're getting better results. So this is actually telling us, well, look for more of that, right? And so we started 15 years ago, a friend of mine started this Women in Nature network. And it was very interesting because the first thing we did is we got together and we said, okay, what do we need to do? What's the objective? What are the targets? And it's like, relax. We're just going to talk. We're just going to, yeah, but how are we going to organize this? It's like, we have a funder that is actually going to help us every year to meet in one part of the world. And we're just going to talk. And right now, there's more than I would say the chapters that have been built are probably 30 in 20 countries, and it's really working well. And it's just women talking to each other, giving each other tips of how did they do this, And then, of course, with women, it also comes the aspect of indigenous groups and also Afro-descendants, so all this community. I say, as long as you can help people get organized and overcome whatever biases are out there, if they get organized, you're already half of the trip to get to the goal is already there,
Well, let's please thank Renee again for a wonderful talk.